How does a person in the middle of the day on one of the busiest and most famous streets in the entire world simply cease to exist? Imagine walking down Fifth Avenue in New York City, surrounded by hundreds of people, only to turn a corner and vanish from the face of the earth, leaving behind not a single clue. This is not the opening of a novel, but the very real and eternally baffling story of Dorothy Arnold, a wealthy heiress whose disappearance in 1910 became one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. The New York of 1910 was a city of stark contrasts, a glittering jewel of the Gilded Age where immense fortunes were paraded along grand avenues while a different world existed in the shadows. It was a time of strict social codes, where a family's reputation was paramount, especially for the elite. For the Arnold family, their name was their most valuable asset, a currency of respect and influence. They would soon learn that the desperate need to protect this name would become the single greatest obstacle in the search for their beloved daughter, creating a fog of secrecy that may have obscured the truth forever. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was the very picture of a privileged young woman of her era. At 25 years old, she was a Vassar graduate, an aspiring writer, and the daughter of Francis Arnold, a highly successful and respected importer of fine perfumes and goods. She lived with her family in a luxurious four-story brownstone on East 79th Street, a life of comfort and social engagements. Yet beneath this polished surface, Dorothy harbored a secret life and private frustrations, dreams of literary success that were consistently met with disappointment, a detail that would later be scrutinized from every possible angle. The morning of December 12, 1910, began like any other for Dorothy. She was in bright spirits, having just finished a new dress she planned to wear to her sister's upcoming debutante party. Around 10:30 a.m., she informed her mother that she was going shopping for a new evening gown. She left the family home with about $30 in cash, a sum equivalent to over $800 today, and walked into the bustling city. The winter air was crisp, the streets were alive with the energy of the approaching holidays, and no one in her family had any reason to suspect this day would be unlike any other. Dorothy's movements that day were initially easy to trace. She walked south down Fifth Avenue, stopping first at the Park and Tilford candy store at the corner of 59th Street, where she purchased a half-pound box of chocolates, charging it to her family's account. From there, she continued to Brentano's bookstore, located between 27th and 28th Streets. Inside, she bought a book of light-hearted essays titled Engaged Girl Sketches. The cashier and other patrons noted nothing unusual about her demeanor. She was just another well-dressed young woman, enjoying a day of shopping in the city. Just after leaving the bookstore around 2:00 p.m., Dorothy had a chance encounter with a friend, Gladys King. They chatted for a few minutes on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. Dorothy told Gladys she was planning to walk home through Central Park. She seemed cheerful and perfectly normal. As they parted ways, Dorothy waved goodbye and continued walking north. This brief, casual conversation on a crowded city street would be the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy Arnold. She waved to her friend, turned and walked out of history. As evening fell on December 12th, the Arnold family began to worry. Dorothy was a punctual and considerate daughter who would never stay out late without informing her family. When she failed to appear for dinner, a quiet concern turned into palpable fear. Her mother began making frantic calls to Dorothy's friends, but no one had seen her since that afternoon. The family waited through a long and agonizing night, hoping for the sight of her key in the door, a hope that would slowly curdle into a nightmare as the hours ticked by. In a decision that would be endlessly criticized and debated for decades, Francis Arnold did not call the police. The family's primary concern was avoiding a scandal. The newspapers of the era were ruthless, and the thought of the Arnold name being dragged through the mud in connection with a missing daughter was unbearable. Instead of relying on the New York City police, Mr. Arnold first called a family friend and lawyer, John S. Keith. He wanted this matter handled quietly, discreetly, and above all, internally. The search for Dorothy began not with a citywide alert, but with a whisper. For 6 agonizing weeks, the Arnold family and their lawyer conducted a secret investigation. They hired the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency, believing their expertise and discretion were the best tools to find Dorothy without alerting the press. They quietly questioned her friends, visited hospitals and morgues across the city and in neighboring states, and even sent investigators to Europe. They spent thousands of dollars chasing faint whispers and false leads, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world, a silence that was deafening to those within the house. The secret search yielded absolutely nothing. As the weeks turned into more than a month, the strain became unbearable. John S. Keith, the lawyer, finally convinced a reluctant Frances Arnold that they had exhausted all private options. They had no choice but to seek the help of the police. In late January 1911, 6 weeks after Dorothy was last seen, the Arnolds finally reported their daughter missing. The moment they did, the story they had so desperately tried to contain exploded, becoming front-page news across the country and a sensation around the world. The police were immediately hampered by the 6-week delay. The trail, if there ever was one, had gone ice cold. Any potential witnesses would have long forgotten a face in the crowd from a month and a half ago. Any physical evidence would have been lost. The NYPD was frustrated with the family's secrecy, believing the obsession with avoiding scandal had likely cost them their best chance of ever finding Dorothy. The investigation was now a public spectacle, and the Arnold family was forced to offer a $1,000 reward for information. As the police delved into Dorothy's life, a picture emerged that was far more complex than the one her family presented. Friends described her as being secretly frustrated with her sheltered life and overbearing parents. Her ambition to become a writer was a core part of her identity, but she had recently faced crushing disappointment. 2 of her short stories had been rejected by McClure's magazine just before her disappearance. One story in particular, The Poinsettia and the Flame, was returned to her. In her room, police found the rejection slips and burned fragments of her manuscripts in the fireplace. This discovery led to the first major theory, suicide. Had the literary rejections plunged her into a depression so deep that she decided to end her life? Her family vehemently denied this, insisting she was a happy, stable young woman. But the police had to consider it. They dredged the reservoirs in Central Park, the route she had told her friend she planned to take. But no trace of her was found. Furthermore, Dorothy was deeply afraid of water, making a drowning suicide seem unlikely to those who knew her best. The investigation took a dramatic turn when the family's lawyer, John S. Keith, revealed a closely guarded secret. Dorothy was not just a sheltered heiress. She was a woman with a secret romantic life. She had been involved with a man named George Griscom Jr., a 42-year-old engineer who was a family acquaintance. Griscom was significantly older and came from a less prominent family, making him an unsuitable match in the eyes of the Arnolds. Dorothy had been meeting with him in secret for months. When the police first sought to question George Griscom, they learned he was in Italy with his mother. He had sailed for Europe just 2 days after Dorothy vanished. This immediately cast a dark cloud of suspicion over him. Through telegraphs, he denied any knowledge of her disappearance. However, under pressure from John Keith, who traveled to Italy to confront him, Griscom admitted the truth. He and Dorothy had been deeply involved, and he had even invited her to visit him in Europe, an invitation she had declined. Griscom's confession blew the case wide open. He revealed that he had met with Dorothy several times at Brentano's bookstore, the last place she was definitively seen. He provided the family lawyer with a collection of her letters, which were described as despondent. In them, Dorothy lamented her failed literary career, calling herself a complete failure. This painted a picture of a deeply unhappy young woman, a stark contrast to the cheerful person her family described. Suddenly, the theory of running away seemed far more plausible. The idea that Dorothy had eloped, or simply run away to start a new life in Europe, became a leading theory. Had she used the money her family gave her for a new dress to buy a steamship ticket under an assumed name? Investigators scoured the passenger lists of every ship that had departed New York in the weeks after her disappearance, but found no one matching her description. The theory also had a major flaw. Dorothy was deeply attached to her family, and it seemed out of character for her to cause them such immense pain without sending any word. Another, darker theory began to circulate, one that was only whispered due to the social taboos of the time. In that era, a trip to the country was often a euphemism for a secret medical procedure, specifically an abortion. These procedures were illegal, unregulated, and often performed in clandestine clinics by untrained individuals. A botched operation could easily result in death. Had Dorothy, facing a secret pregnancy, sought out such a clinic and died during the procedure, the clinic's operators would have every reason to dispose of her body secretly to avoid prosecution. This theory, while speculative, seemed to explain the totality of her disappearance. It would account for her vanishing without a trace and the complete lack of communication. Her family, especially her father, was horrified by this suggestion and publicly denounced it as a vile slander against his daughter's character. However, the police took it seriously enough to discreetly investigate several known illegal clinics in the city. But this line of inquiry, like all the others, ultimately led to a dead end with no evidence to support it. As the weeks turned into months, the case became a media circus. Dozens of people from all over the country came forward claiming to have seen Dorothy Arnold. She was spotted in department stores, on trains, and in small towns. The police and the Pinkerton detectives followed up on every credible lead, but each one proved to be a case of mistaken identity. Postcards even arrived at the Arnold home, signed with her name, but they were quickly identified as cruel hoaxes. The public's fascination only deepened the family's anguish. One of the most significant breakthroughs in understanding Dorothy's secret life came from George Griscom. He admitted that just before she disappeared, she had asked him for money to travel to Europe. He had loaned her $100. More importantly, he revealed that Dorothy had a secret post office box that she used for her literary correspondences and presumably for their secret letters. This discovery confirmed that Dorothy was capable of maintaining a complex life hidden from her family, making the idea that she could orchestrate her own disappearance seem more credible. A far grimmer lead emerged in 1916, years after the main investigation had wound down. An inmate in a Rhode Island prison, a convicted felon named Edward Glennorris, claimed that he had been hired by a high society doctor to dispose of a young woman's body around the time Dorothy vanished. He claimed the doctor told him the woman had died during an illegal operation. He said he helped the doctor bury her body in the cellar of a house near New York City. The family's lawyer, John S. Keith, took this claim seriously enough to investigate. He arranged for the cellar of the house Glennorris, identified to be excavated. The entire basement floor was dug up in a search for human remains. The press waited with bated breath, believing the mystery was finally about to be solved. But after a thorough search, nothing was found. The cellar was empty. Glennorris's story was dismissed as a desperate attempt by a convict to gain attention, and perhaps a reduced sentence. The police also explored the possibility that Dorothy had been the victim of a random, violent crime. Had she been attacked during her intended walk through Central Park? This seemed unlikely. An attack in broad daylight that left no witnesses and no evidence was improbable, even in 1910. Furthermore, her body was never found in the park, despite extensive searches. Kidnapping for ransom was also ruled out, as the wealthy Arnold family never received any kind of demand for money. The absence of a body, a crime scene, or a ransom note left investigators with an impossible puzzle. Every logical path led to a dead end. If she had committed suicide, where was her body? If she had run away, how did a woman of her prominence remain hidden for so long? If she was murdered, how was the crime committed on a busy street without a single witness? The case was a perfect vacuum, a story with a beginning and a middle, but no end. The search for Dorothy took a devastating toll on her family, both emotionally and financially. Frances Arnold reportedly spent over $100,000 on the investigation, an astronomical sum at the time, equivalent to millions of dollars today. He never gave up hope, maintaining until his final days that his daughter had been attacked and killed on her way home, and that her body had been disposed of in the Central Park Reservoir, before the police had a chance to dredge it properly. In 1914, 4 years after she vanished, the police officially listed the Dorothy Arnold case as closed, concluding that she was most likely deceased. For the family, however, there was no closure. The constant public speculation and the pain of not knowing were a wound that never healed. The case became a permanent shadow hanging over the Arnold family, a symbol of their greatest and most public tragedy. When Frances Arnold died in 1922, his will contained a poignant and heartbreaking instruction. He legally forbade any of his surviving children from ever using the money he left them to continue the search for Dorothy. He had spent a fortune and found nothing but pain. In his final act, he seemed to accept that the mystery would never be solved, and he wanted his remaining family to find peace, free from the obsession that had consumed him. Dorothy's brother, John, held a different belief. He was convinced that his sister was dead, but he did not believe it was suicide or an accident. He maintained that George Griscom Jr. knew more than he had ever admitted. However, without any evidence to support this suspicion, it remained just that, a brother's grief-stricken theory. Griscom lived until 1947, never changing his story and never being officially considered a suspect by the police. The case of Dorothy Arnold has become a cornerstone of true crime lore. It is a quintessential, vanishing woman story, a chilling example of how a person can be erased from a bustling metropolis. The story has been retold in countless books, articles, and documentaries, each one attempting to piece together the fragments of her last known day. Her story resonates because it is a mystery that feels both antique and modern, a tale of a woman trapped between societal expectations and her own secret desires. Over a century has passed, and we are no closer to knowing the truth than the investigators were in 1911. Her name is etched in the history of New York City, not for her literary ambitions or her social standing, but for the inexplicable nature of her disappearance. She remains a ghost on Fifth Avenue, a symbol of one of the city's most profound and unsettling unsolved mysteries. What happened to Dorothy Arnold after she waved goodbye to her friend? Was she the victim of a dark secret, a violent crime, or was she the architect of her own disappearance, a woman who successfully shed her old life and began anew? The city has kept its silence, and the truth, like Dorothy herself, vanished into the winter air, leaving behind only a question that echoes through time.